I'm Teresa Caraggio, and this is Third Paradigm. Today I'm calling this the space between stories, which is a beautiful phrase that Charles Eisenstein used in a recent talk he gave in Black Mountain, North Carolina. I'm going to be comparing that to A Course in Miracles and also to Ether Pirates of the Materium, which 3 different readers have suggested that I look at. So I'll be trying to categorize and make sense of those. I feel like as a housewife, my job is to make things tidy. And how I do that with ideas is to say, okay, well, this fits here, and this goes with these things, and here's the function that this has. So let's try to see whether we can declutter and organize these ideas. Here's one sentence that I wrote down from Charles's talk. There's an intelligence that orchestrates and organizes all things and places us in the conditions where we have the opportunity to say yes or no to the next story that our soul has been offered. There is a plan. I'm going to read that again. There's an intelligence that orchestrates and organizes all things and places us in the conditions where we have the opportunity to say yes or no to the next story that our soul has been offered. There is a plan. Years ago, probably a decade ago, I had the opportunity to interview Charles for my pirate radio station, and I asked him whether A Course in Miracles was something that he had studied, because everything that he says sounds very similar. And what he said is that he gets asked that question all the time. So I'm not the only one who's seen that similarity, but he actually has never read it. So I think it's very interesting that we now have a presidential candidate, Marianne Williamson, who has studied A Course in Miracles for as long as I think it's been around, but whose platform I'm not sure is actually consistent with it. And I'll be talking about that in another episode. And then we have Charles, who's advising Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and Charles is very consistent with the thinking of A Course in Miracles without actually having read it. The idea that there is a plan and that there is this intelligence that's orchestrating all things is very consistent with A Course in Miracles. The way that I think of it is that Spirit is the choreographer, and that my job is to listen and figure out which way the music is pushing me to go, that I'm responding, but I'm not in charge of the plan. I'm responsive to the plan. And I think that history is being written backwards. I think that the solution has already been accomplished. And in A Course in Miracles, the premise is that we don't exist as separate minds inside separate bodies inside the world. That the world exists inside our one mind. And that we're dreaming this idea that we're separate bodies. And it is not a good dream. It's a dream that we need to make into a good dream in order to be able to wake up. The part that I would say is different in A Course in Miracles is that it's not a story that you say yes or no to. You either say yes or you say, not yet. But you don't say no, because that story is going to be offered to you again and again and again for as long as it takes. And so you can't really make a mistake that can't be undone, because every time the story comes back and you can say yes or not quite yet. Charles also says there is an intelligence in the matrix of being and relationship, And I think that's very important, that we only exist in relationship. The relationship, the space between you and I, is the only place that's truly alive. I am because you are, as they say. Another line that really struck me was that he says, synchronicity is being taken out of the story for a moment, the time when the story shifts, and that we'll experience more synchronicities because the shift will only happen with your consent. Again, very consistent with A Course in Miracles, is that our free will is being able to say yes or not yet, but that until we say yes, the story can't shift, that there can't be this awareness that we are the ones who are in control of the story, and that we are going to be doing the right thing. We're already doing the right thing. We are on the shortest path, as Google Maps would say. You are on the shortest route. Even though it seems like there's a lot of delays, you're still on the shortest route. And this is going to lead us into the place that we are able to wake up. When Charles talks about synchronicities, I think that's what the Course means by the miracle. That the miracle is this recognition that this is not something that's all happening to you. This is not random events. And the reason that you recognize that is because of the timing. It's not so much because of what happens. It's more saying, if this thing needed to happen, did it happen in a way that actually worked out as best that it could? Is the timing something that's significant? And that timing always makes me step back and say, oh yeah, there is just no way that this is coincidence. There's no way that this timing could have happened in this way without it meaning something. And there's either a sutra or a Zen Tao saying that says, watch the timing. And that's what's been very significant to me, is that when I look at what's happening, I pay close attention to the timing, because the timing and the synchronicities are the kinds of things where I can't kid myself that this is just by accident. Charles also says that we have two purposes in being here. One is to receive the gift and behold the magnificence, to appreciate. And the other is to give that forward. That, again, is something the Course talks about quite a lot, that to give is to receive, and to receive is to give, that you can't have evidence that you have something until you give it, and that unlike the way that the world works, in reality, giving increases what you have. It's not like you give something up and you no longer have it. And this is, I think, most true when you look at ideas, that ideas just go forward and they strengthen the more people take them and make them their own. So this is something that I think we can pay attention to and be fearless in terms of how we give. And I think one of the most fearless ways we can do that is by giving compliments. On James Corbett's Corbett report, it has shortened my name to Therese. And I've been thinking that I should invent Therese syndrome, where you just can't help yourself from blurting out nice things that make people feel good about themselves. And if we really are not separate beings, but all the same person, what better thing could you be doing for yourself than making you feel good about yourself? And the last phrase that he uses that I really picked up on is that you can't speak something into existence if it's not already there, if it's not already true. And there is a phase in the Course in Miracles where you discover that your words have power and that you can bring visions and make things happen. And that's really frightening, because what we want to believe is that we're helpless, that we're victims of the world, that we are weak, that we didn't make anything happen. That's what the world has created for us. That's why we're in this dream, is because we want to believe that we're small and powerless. And when we discover that we're not, I think it can be very frightening, because you feel like you can make bad things happen too. And if bad things happen, it's your fault. And what the Course says is that you can only partner with the will of God, that the will of God is entirely good, and that when you create, you can only create by accessing that power. If you try to be doing something on your own, it just doesn't work. And so that's why it is a dance. That's why it is a conversation, why you need to be listening and answering, because you're not just making things up and creating all this. What you're doing is partnering with the voice for God, which is what Spirit is, and using that initiative to be able to say, here's how things could be guided in a way that would be helpful, and I'm going to do my part to guide them in that way. And I'll end by talking about Clif High and his recent podcast, which is called Time is on Our Side. And this is Ether Pirates of the Materium, I think it is, and it talks about these different ages, or yugas. And I am going to guess that probably most of you know more about this than I do. I have a very superficial understanding, and so I'm just going to give some thoughts off the top of my head. My sense is that there's a way in which this is hopeful, because it says that things change and that we can go through these galaxy flexes where things get bad and then things get better, and that there is something that's at work that will make things that haven't yet manifested come into being. And so in that sense, it's hopeful. In another sense, it's very long periods of time that he's talking about, and there's no real control that we have over it. I talk in some other episodes about the concept of time, that I think that time is flexible. In fact, I think that what we're in is a bubble of time that is outside of eternity, because eternity and time cannot coexist. That as soon as you start measuring something and make it calibrated, it no longer can be infinite. And the same thing goes for infinity and space, that you can't have a beginning and an end in order to count something and still have eternity. So I think reality is infinity and eternity, but this bubble that we're in is outside of that, is created as the only place that infinity and eternity are not. And instead, we have time and space, which I picture as a hamster wheel. It's something that gives us all the revolutions that we need to keep on scurrying and being busy and making as much busy work as we need before we step aside and say, okay, now it's time to wake up. So for me, the idea of the space between stories is something that gives me more sense of both change and personal control, and the idea that there is a plan, so that I have the ability to say yes, but I don't have the ability to screw it up and say no. that this is something that's in motion and it's going to happen. And my only decision is, do I delay or do I embrace this with everything I've got? And I think we all are in agreement about that. For more on these theories, here's an early one called What is the Matter by Ian McGilchrist. And for some reason, I think the Four Agreements is one that fits in here. Thank you for watching.